our objective is to pass tax reform by the August recess, and I think that's a very aggressive timetable, but realistic and something that the President and I are very committed to doing.
So by August, voted, done, agreed.
And signed.
We hope so, right? That was Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin speaking with our very own Neil Cavuto just last week. And Mr. Mnuchin says the White House is aiming for a tax reform signed, sealed, and delivered by August. And White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer doubled down on that August deadline just about an hour ago. But there are Republicans out there that are singing kind of a different tune. In fact, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell spoke earlier today saying tax reform may have to wait.
There are some constraints here. I don't want to get too much down in the legislative weeds, but we have two reconciliations to do. We have to get the one that we're going to use for health care out of the way before we can go to the second one. I share your view that I think finishing on tax reform will take longer. But we do have to finish the health care debate, up or down, win or lose, before we go to taxes.
All right, Grover Norquist is back with me, along with the Heritage Foundation's Director of Policy Research, Tommy Binion. Good to see you guys. I imagine you agree with that, right, Grover? In other words, you got to get health care done first, and that's critical, important, if you're going to take the next step and get what has been your life's work, lower taxes, accomplished.
Now, yes, the reason why you have to do health care first is that health care is about $1 trillion in taxes. It reduces the baseline for how much you then have to raise. It makes tax reform possible by reducing the amount of money that that has to be raised. We did this also when we made the extenders permanent a year ago. That's about $600 billion in lowering the baseline. So tax reform is about a $2.5 trillion tax cut over a decade. It's why it's so pro-growth and will be so helpful in creating jobs and making America more competitive.
And yet, Tommy, the Heritage Foundation has not been a big fan of the President's health care plan and the Republicans' health care plan. You guys have criticized it, but, you know, if you listen to Grover there and you listen to a lot of others, it sounds like you don't really have a ton of choices here. It's one or the other, and you either repeal and replace it or you get stuck with Obamacare. And if you're stuck with Obamacare, that means you may never get tax reform through.
Well, we at the Heritage Foundation are definitely big fans of repealing Obamacare and repealing it right away and repealing it wholesale. The devil is in the details in terms of what you replace it with, and we're at the table trying to help the president find exactly what should go in that bill, because like Grover.
All right, what's the number one wholesale change that you would advocate for then? What's your biggest problem?
We've got to end the Medicaid expansion right away. This bill keeps it in place for 3 years and then keeps the higher federal contributions to Medicaid for all current enrollees forevermore after that.
Okay, but so you're going to keep it in place for 3 years. Isn't that just in part because you don't want the sort of Band-Aid sticker shock of, you know, leaving people with nothing?
Well, if you kick it down the road for 3 years, you're leaving it in the hands of another Congress, maybe one who didn't run on repealing Obamacare, to leave that cliff in place. We've seen this play out before, where another Congress will extend it further and further and further. And that's going to cost hundreds of billions of dollars as we get into 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 years.
Okay, so what would you do with all those people that suddenly lose their health insurance that, you know, you don't know? I mean, they could wind up in a catastrophic accident, be in the emergency room, and effectively wind up costing the taxpayers even more because they don't have some form of health insurance to begin with.
Well, hopefully a pro-growth free market plan will drive down the cost of health insurance so much that those individuals with maybe a little bit of assistance from the federal government will be able to afford plans that insurance companies are going to offer them.
So let's assume this gets done, Tommy, for the sake of argument. Humor me, and we'll go with it. You know, they're able to work out something, and that means moving on to tax reform. I mean, do you think this timetable is really realistic? When you hear Steve Mnuchin say August, what think you?
Well, I think what's driving that is the conventional wisdom in this town is the closer you get to an election, the fewer possibilities there are to get things done. Of course, the momentum of the first 100 days of the Trump presidency is a good thing for tax reform. The momentum of having the majorities in both chambers for Republicans is a good thing for tax reform. I'm not surprised that it's Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell who is pumping the brakes, because that puts all the pressure squarely on the Senate to act very fast here.
All right. Well, I'll tell you one thing. Grover, it would sure be something if he could actually repeal and replace Obamacare and get tax reform through, all within his first year that would be what we call impressive, would it not?
Well, it will, and that's why he's pushing it very hard, and he's reaching out to anybody who is now beginning to engage in the process, which had been going on for 4 years, so glad to have anybody come to the table now with ideas. But the reason why this package looks the way it is it's been pre-caucused with the guys in the House and Senate, both on health care and on tax reform. So there's a great deal of agreement, and it's even been working through the governors because there have been conference calls to make sure the governors are on board. We need to get 51 votes in the Senate.
Well, you know, maybe the bowling will help. They're going to have a bowling night at the White House.
Yes, actually it will.
Grover, Tommy, good to see you. Thank you.